Alrighty. I feel the need to preface this again. I feel the need to preface everything, it seems like. But I just wanted to tell you a little story about my first experience with this movie. Well, it all started back when I saw Iron Man 2 in the theater. I stayed after the credits because I knew that they were probably going to do something after the credits to further set up another movie. And I saw Agent Coulson walking around in the desert, and he came across Thor's hammer in the ground. When I first saw this, I just thought, really? Because Thor, I at the time I barely knew anything about Thor. I just said, really, the Norse god, the helmet with the wings and the big red cape. He wields the hammer and he channels lightning into the hammer and he spins the hammer around to fly. It just seemed like something that could very easily be screwed up. Even when I heard that Kenneth Branagh was going to direct it, in fact, I might have actually been even more trepidatious when I heard that Kenneth Branagh was going to direct it, because honestly, he's one of those guys that does not seem like he would be doing a comic book movie. I might have mentioned this when I did my vlog on Thor 2, but Kenneth Branagh, yeah, he's a Shakespearean director. I mean, I can understand him doing Frankenstein at the most, but Marvel's Thor, I don't know, it just struck me as very odd. But much to my surprise, Thor it's all right. It's all right. I mean, there were a lot of elements about it that left me impressed, and there were other elements about it that really left me underwhelmed and kind of disappointed, especially considering all of the elements that I liked. And there are a fair few. However, this does suffer from some of the same problems as Iron Man 2, and I will elaborate on that momentarily. But the basic story behind this is that Thor lives in the mythical realm of Asgard, where a bunch of other Norse gods and goddesses dwell. And years after his father Odin conquered the frost giants, which are these exactly what they sound like, these tall blue guys who wield the power of ice. After Odin bested them in a great war in the movie's prologue, the Nine Realms are in a tentative state of peace. However, Thor, after an attempt is made to steal a powerful Asgardian artifact called the Tesseract, which Odin had actually previously taken from the Frost Giants as the source of their power, the spoils of war. Well, after the Frost Giants sneak into Asgard and try and take it back, Thor goes to the land of the Frost Giants with his friends, the Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, along with his brother Loki, the god of mischief and trickery, and he attempts to teach them a lesson. I mean, he does not want Asgard to look weak. He does not want the Frost Giants to think that there is absolutely no retaliation for this kind of covert attack. However, he is reprimanded by his father, and through his arrogance and stupidity, I'm using direct quotes there, he opens the Nine Realms to war once again. And Odin basically says, Thor, you have grown too big for your britches, and I cast you out. I banish you to Earth, which I believe they refer to as Midgard. Now, all the while, Thor has to learn humility if he is ever going to return to Asgard and ever going to reclaim his hammer, which Odin has also placed in the ground deep in the desert of New Mexico. Because Thor, he can only pull the hammer when he is worthy. he cannot return to Asgard until he is worthy, until he has learned his humility. So that's the basic gist. And all the while, Loki is trying to conquer Asgard. Are you really surprised that Loki is the bad guy, especially even if you are completely unfamiliar with the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Marvel Comics in general? You probably know that Loki is not someone to be trusted. He's the god of deception, you know? But, first of all, one thing I really have to compliment this movie on is the acting. I mean, they got some pretty powerhouse actors to portray these characters. And oddly enough, some of them I didn't even know who they were, because when I first saw this movie, I didn't know who Chris Hemsworth was, but it turns out he is the perfect fit for Thor. I mean, he handles the brash side of Thor very well. He handles the physical aspect of Thor. I mean, he certainly has the build. While also he is very believable when he predictably learns humility toward the end of the movie. He really is perfect for the role of Thor. He seems to be the best guy who I could think of that could channel all of these different sides of what could easily be a pretty shallow and forgettable character. I mean, you could easily just make this guy like, oh, I am Thor, and just never really see anything beneath that. But Hemsworth does it well. I mean, I was actually surprised at how into his conflict I was getting. Tom Hiddleston, I had also never heard of, but it turns out he is also pitch perfect as Loki. I mean, he's not nearly as hammy as some of the past renditions of Loki have been. I mean, before this, my biggest exposure to Loki came when I played the game Marvel Ultimate Alliance, I believe it was, where Loki was completely devoid of any depth. And I liked that game, but it really was just kind of a mosh pit of Marvel characters without really exploring any of them in great detail. However, Loki here, he is portrayed in a very sympathetic light. I mean, he is not your typical Marvel villain. And I don't really like using that phrase, but really the villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe have been, thus far, on average, less than stellar. I mean, I can think of a few good ones, like Tim Roth in The Incredible Hulk. I want to say Mickey Rourke, but he was underused in Iron Man 2. So the villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are really hit or miss, because like I said, I didn't really care much for Jeff Bridges in Iron Man 1. And Loki, honestly, when I heard that Loki was going to be the villain this time around, narratively it made sense because he is the villain that is closest to Thor. I mean, he is his brother. But I just thought, how much of a physical threat is Loki going to be to Thor? But then I figured out he's not meant to be a physical threat. He is the god of deception. He deceives Thor. He leads him on. He directs circumstances against Thor, and that is where the real threat comes in. And overall, they did that very well, and Tom Hiddleston portrays that very well. I mean, they really give him this arc in this movie. It's not handled probably as well as it should have been for a few reasons, for a few obvious reasons, but overall, yeah, I liked Loki in this movie. I mean, he has this certain sneery charm to him that I think few actors can really pull off. And the fact that Hiddleston, and again, I had never heard of Tom Hiddleston before this movie. The fact that, wow, this guy can really do that well, it surprised me. So I really like the two leads. Natalie Portman plays Jane Foster, I believe she's an astrophysicist who Thor falls in love with when he comes to Earth. Now, as for the love affair itself, it's not really anything to write home about for the reason that I keep foreshadowing in this video. I mean, they don't really get appropriate time to really develop any sort of genuine relationship. It feels rushed, but the scenes that they do have together do feel pretty believable. I mean, they don't have the best chemistry in the world, but there is a certain innocent charm to their conversations, and there is a certain enjoyment that comes from Natalie Portman's character. How kind of appealing yet put upon that she is. I mean, she's one of those female characters who works very hard and is very dedicated to her craft, and the sheer determination that Natalie Portman portrays in this movie, while balancing that with some of the more comedic aspects, like trying to cope with meeting this Norse god. It's a pretty balanced performance, although the writing sometimes hurts her. I mean, I think the writing sometimes makes her a little bit too flighty, but overall, yeah, Natalie Portman is a lot of fun in this. Anthony Hopkins, I actually felt, was kind of hit or miss. I mean, at times he can give this very beautiful, kind of over the top performance as Odin. This very powerful performance, like when he's banishing Thor. At times he can give a performance at times he can give a really good performance like that, but other times when he's telling Loki his true origins, which I'm not going to spoil, when he's kind of talking to Loki, he looks like he's about to fall asleep mid-sentence, which in hindsight isn't really helped by the fact that he literally goes into something called the Odin sleep about halfway through this movie. So I don't know if that was intentional. I mean, I don't know if Brenna said to Hopkins, act like you were literally about to fall asleep at any second. I don't know. It was weird because it was really hard for me to get a read on this performance because, like I said, at times it's really good and at times it's not so good. So it seems like they were never really able to find that perfect balance, the perfect balance of Odin. But the casting itself of Anthony Hopkins as Odin is pretty good, and overall, I like him. I mean, it's just a few of those scenes where, like I said, he's about to fall asleep. I mean, he just looks so bored and so disinterested and so drowsy. That kind of hurts his overall impression, and yeah. But the supporting cast is pretty good. Clark Gregg is still pretty funny as Agent Coulson, and what I really like about his type of humor is that he's not in your face. He doesn't come in and do his little shtick about like, oh hey, I'm the comic relief. No, he's actually a very serious, very straight-faced SHIELD agent who just happens to be dealing with some very crazy otherworldly stuff, and that's where the comedy comes in. So yeah, Clark Gregg is still very good. Stellan Skarsgård is pretty good as Jane Foster's mentor. I forget his name, but Skarsgård is pretty good. Another actor who I never thought would be in a comic book movie. It just doesn't really seem too palatable given his persona as an actor. I'm not saying that with any kind of negative connotation, but this doesn't really seem like the type of dramatic role that he would normally shoot for. Especially given that this exact same year he also played a supporting role in David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So I don't know, make of that what you will, but he's pretty good in this. And Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, Jamie Alexander, Ray Stevenson, all them, they're also pretty good. They leave probably more of an impression than a lesser actor would have. I mean, probably some people might be bothered by the fact that, they cast an Asian guy as a member of the Warriors 3, or even going further, they cast a black guy as Heimdall, who, to my understanding, was white in the original comic. It doesn't bother me. I mean, as long as they do a good job and as long as their miscast doesn't completely take me out of the movie, I don't mind. And I would argue that there aren't really any major miscasts in this movie. So yeah, Jamie Alexander, Ray Stevenson, and the other two members of the of Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 are pretty good. They leave an impression despite how relatively little they are in the movie. I wish they had been in it more. I mean, I wish we had seen more of Thor fighting alongside his allies, but he was stuck on Earth. Oh, what? Who else? Idris Elba as Heimdall. This is what I was mentioning earlier. Idris Elba is so charismatic, and he provides an interesting blend of seriousness while at the same time giving off an aura of dry humor that I think that again makes the character of Heimdall more memorable than he probably would have been if placed in lesser hands. So yeah, I like Idris Elba as Heimdall. I mean, he's physically imposing, to say the least. I mean, if nothing, I mean, even if you hate Idris Elba as Heimdall, or even if you hate him as an actor, I mean, he has the build. I mean, he certainly has the presence to be the all-powerful gatekeeper. The one member of the cast I absolutely could not stand, and again, this carries over into Thor 2, is Kat Dennings as Natalie Portman's assistant. I'm not even going to be bothered to remember her name, but it's Kat Dennings doing her shtick of like, oh, get it. It's funny because she was raised in the modern age where we have all sorts of technology and modern slang and blah 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 blah, and I just could not stand her. I mean, if you like her, I would love to hear why. Because to me, she takes me out of the movie both of these movies, both Thor and Thor: The Dark World. She completely takes me out of it every single time she's on screen. She is annoying. She's not interesting as a character. She has no chemistry with any of the other actors. And I get what they were trying to do with them trying to inject a little bit of self-awareness into the whole ordeal, but really it just comes off as the modern-day equivalent of Carrie Wer's character in Beastmaster 2. And I'm not comparing this movie in terms of quality to Beastmaster 2, but I'm just saying that's generally what they do with Kat Dennings in this movie, and I've never thought Kat Dennings was funny. I still don't. And frankly, several times in this movie I was questioning why is she even here? Why is she here? She contributes nothing to the plot. She clearly does not serve her purpose as a comic relief character because she's not funny. She's not. But if there's another really good aspect I can take away from it, it is the production design by Bo Welch. Now, Bo Welch, he's known for a lot of movies where he did the production design. The Tim Burton Batman movies, Men in Black, etc. I mean, he's a pretty high-profile production designer, and I'm glad he's generally sticking to that and not really venturing into directing again, like he did with, I believe, Cat in the Hat. But yeah, I was really surprised at how I liked the whole kind of heavenly aesthetic. I really liked the aesthetic that they gave Asgard, and I really liked a lot of the very big, imposing sets. I mean, yeah, I wish we had gotten to know the city itself a little bit better, again, like we did in Thor 2. But for the most part, I liked the design. I liked how it was kind of this cross between this cosmic technology with the Bifrost and whatever, and traditional Norse architecture. I mean, or not really Norse architecture. I mean, you would think Norse because they're Norse gods, but you kind of get what I'm saying. It's this big, majestic city, and a lot of it really blew me away with how much I was really liking these sets. It also gives the actors something to work off of. I mean, to where they're not just saying, hey, we're acting in this comic book movie. We're supposed to be these Norse gods. But these sets, I think, really help the actors' performances in terms of authenticity, believability, so on and so forth. And even the New Mexico stuff, the small New Mexican town, it's well designed. I would have liked to have spent more time in Asgard, but what can you do? Kenneth Branagh's directing, I actually think, is kind of hit or miss also, because what I mean by that is that the Dutch angles sometimes feel appropriate and sometimes feel completely out of place. He directs the actors well enough in basically the whole movie, except the Dutch angles really got distracting after a while. Now, I'm not talking about the stuff in Asgard, because whenever he uses a Dutch angle in Asgard, it feels appropriate. I mean, it feels fitting to this very otherworldly, mythological setting. It's just when he uses it in the Earth scenes, where it feels kind of random. I mean, I can see what he was going for in wanting to maintain some kind of cinematic consistency, but I honestly think he could have found a way to blend his movie better than just using Dutch angles the whole way through. And it's not nearly an abuse of Dutch angles nearly as much as something like Battlefield Earth, but still, it's a lot more than was necessary. And that kind of brings me to one of the biggest problems with this movie. The shield stuff feels every bit, if not more, intrusive this time around as it did in Iron Man 2. And I would argue that the fact that there is so much of the shield subplot in this movie is actually more of a crime here than it was in Iron Man 2, because Iron Man 2, at least there was the justification that it was the sequel to Iron Man. I mean, Iron Man was already an established character. He had already gotten his completely solo venture in the first Iron Man movie. In Iron Man 2, you could argue, well, we'll place this glorified commercial in this movie, and since we already have the character of Iron Man full and well established. But when they put it in what is supposed to be the Thor origin story, it just screams commercialism. I mean, it gives you the distinct or at least it gave me the distinct impression that they're not really making this for any kind of artistic reason. And I'm sure that's not true, but it left me with the impression that they were making this solely to set up the character of Thor for the Avengers. Hence why S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Coulson and the Earth stuff is so prevalent in this movie. Is because they want Thor to kind of lead into the Avengers more so than Iron Man 2. They even throw in Hawkeye for a cameo. I can't really argue with the casting of Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye, but they do absolutely nothing with him. I mean, he just grabs a bow, and fanboys of the audience go like, "Oh, hey, there's Hawkeye," and the movie just says, "Oh, did you enjoy that? Okay, good. Well, now he's gone." That's it. It's nothing more than a cameo. We never really get any insight into his personality. We never get any insight into how good he is with a bow. I mean, all we ever learn about him is that he likes a bow better than a sniper rifle. And the whole setting the origin story of Thor on Earth is kind of what I think is the wrong move. And I understand commercially this makes sense. With the trying to blend it with with the Avengers to not have Thor be completely separate from the earthly conflict, only for him to show up out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere in the Avengers. I understand what they were going for, but they could have found a better way to do this. How? Well, do what they did in Thor 2. Do the same fish out of water story, but do it with sending Natalie Portman's character, Jane Foster, to Asgard. Send her to Asgard like they did in the second movie. Have Thor learn humility by talking to her. That way there would be no way for S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Earth conflict to intrude on what is supposed to be the movie that really establishes the character of Thor, and what really exposes us as the audience to this, again, relatively obscure comic book character. I mean, I honestly think you could have done the whole having to learn humility plot just as well if Natalie Portman had been transported to Asgard. That way he would have communicated with her, and while at the same time learning humility by talking to her, you would also have more time to develop this budding romance between them. There, 2 birds, 1 stone. Just set it on Asgard. And aside from that, there's just something incredibly uninspired about suddenly being transported to Earth from what is such a cool realization of Asgard. I mean, the first half hour is completely set on Asgard, and all of a sudden Thor is banished to Earth, and then it occasionally cuts back to Asgard periodically, but the main narrative is on Earth. And Thor doesn't actually get back to Asgard until maybe the last 10-15 minutes. So it's kind of disappointing in that regard. And again, you probably wouldn't have this problem if he did not. You probably would not have needed to set this movie on Earth if you weren't trying to continually establish the organization of S.H.I.E.L.D. as this force to be reckoned with. So yeah, needless to say, there were a lot of things that irked me about this movie, like namely in some of the narrative. But honestly, I think if you gave Kenneth Branagh complete free reign to direct his Thor movie, a great Thor story, where he fights Asgardian level bad guys, where he fights more with Lady Sif and the Warriors 3, where he interacts more with Loki, where he interacts more with Jane Foster, where he interacts more with the concept of humility. I think if you gave Kenneth Branagh complete free reign and not had what I can only assume to be some contractual obligation to tie it into the Avengers, and I honestly think we could have gotten a truly great movie out of this. But as it is, it's just okay. I mean, it's just serviceable. It's just decent. It's not something I'm too eager to go back to, but again, there are several good points that kind of balance out the gripes that I have. Like I said, the acting is surprisingly solid, with 1 or 2 exceptions. Kat Dennings. The effects and the sets and the costume designs are appropriately majestic and very epic, very otherworldly, and just a feast for the eyes. The character of Thor and the whole Asgardian setting are given probably as much weight as they could be. I mean, I don't really think you could have tied this in better to the more colorful Marvel universe if you had gone for a more realistic aesthetic. Like, I'm just using a recent example here, like Vikings, the History Channel's TV show Vikings. I don't really think you can stick with Marvel's trademark color palette and sense of fun if you had gone that route. So, yeah. Oh, and another thing I want to mention, Patrick Doyle's score is beautiful. Patrick Doyle's score it gives us the appropriately big soundtrack that we want to see in a Thor movie with with a character as powerful as Thor. So yeah, a lot of elements of this movie really impressed me, and other elements not so much. Please, please like, subscribe, share, please. I'll be your best friend.